our project was more focused on the Duke community and student outreach and getting students to vote, register, and just be part of the political process. So and this part was a lot of it was done by Mo, specifically like the techie coding aspects of this. So we built a chatbot. We were inspired by some of specifically, there was this chatbot that was going around pretty heavily over social media regarding a piece of legislation in New York called 50A, and it was a whole chatbot that allowed people to sign a petition to repeal that piece of legislation. And we saw that that was really successful and reached a lot of young people in particular. And then we were looking at, okay, so this is an effective mechanism for reaching people of college age and getting them involved again in a political process like voting. And we were kind of combining that with how can we get more students to vote, specifically given that a lot of research shows that only 40% of college age students vote. And obviously we know that young people are the biggest portion of the electorate, but they don't actually turn out at that same rate. So we decided to implement an SMS chatbot for conducting student outreach that would give them information on how to register to vote if they were registered to vote, how to request an absentee ballot, where their polling place was, and just basically all of the essential information that they would need. A lot of it was connecting them to links, which is one thing that we kind of could potentially keep working around if this is were to be continued in the future, how to give them more precise information. And we, in running this program, we had a little hiccups just because sometimes what ended up happening is we created this whole program. Mo created most of this program. And then we tried to get it out to all these students, and the program itself, after we sent it out, after we were trying to get results, had a couple of hiccups in that you needed to upgrade the program to get more responses and like to work it in certain ways. So we were limited by that, but for the future, that would be something that we would fix. But yeah, if Mo wants to add anything.
I think no, I think it sums up. I think they're giving me a bit too much credit because a lot of training went into like getting the bot set up, and like a lot of testing went into it. So there were times where I would just be like, "Yo, did you guys get the text? Did you get the text? Like, can you send something back to it?" Yeah, it was like an interesting project because I had never done something like that in the past. Like, we don't get a lot of practical knowledge in the CS department, to be honest with you. But one of the interesting things I thought was just the amount of training that has to go into developing a chatbot like that, because every response that someone might give you, like it might not be the exact like yes or yeah that you're looking for, or like the exact like capitalization of vote that you're looking for, and like adding test cases to every possible, direction that your conversation could go in was kind of interesting, and like we had to do a lot of training with it, but in the end, like I thought it was pretty rewarding, and as Dia was saying, I think it could be very beneficial if we get it finalized, yeah.
So just to be continued in every one of these projects, because there's a whole new BAS connections project, and a couple of you are going to be segueing into that. So we're going to share your ideas with those teams as they form. So hopefully there'll be a handoff that will be clean like a relay and not a dropped baton, but we'll see.
Gunther, can I ask a quick question on the chatbot?
Sure. Yeah.
One, fabulous. That sounds wonderful. I know very, very little about tech, but it seems to me like the more times it's used, the better it gets, right? It would learn how to better answer questions by hearing more and more responses. Is that true?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, good. I hope we don't lose the source code. I'm assuming lives in your world. Mo, is it getting handed off so that we can continue on it?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we have like this account with this API called Twilio, and a lot of the coding was just done using their interface. So by just turning over the account to you guys, like you'd have access to all of it, and then on top of that, there was just like one like small script I wrote in Python just to like send an initial message, and like that's like easily uploaded to GitHub or like shared with anyone. So like, yeah, whatever transition is needed, it's like a pretty easy one. Yeah.
And we also have all of our scripting and stuff still with you know, if this person responds with this, then you get segued to this question and all of that, like the different chain links. So that can be expanded and done in more detail, but we have all of that that could be passed on as well, which is integrated in the code, but also the raw copies of it.
Great. It's awesome. Great work. I'm also, yeah, everything, all student teams have turned in deliverables, and we will talk about, you know, there's a lot you could deliver. And I hope there's a way to persuade you to keep involved in this project. Involved. That's true for everybody. Let's go on to the next team, because lots of great ideas. Jimmy, can I call on you, because you're right there?
Yeah, certainly. So I worked with Aaron on provisional ballots. Yeah. So Aaron, if you want to, feel free to jump in at any time if you want to expand on anything or if I miss anything. So basically, provisional ballots, most of us are familiar with, but if you show up on election day and you're not in the voter registration database for whatever reason, you'll get handed a provisional ballot, and it's counted separately. And North Carolina has a lot of provisional ballots. It had over 60,000 in 2016 and 35,000 in 2018. So Aaron and I, what we were looking into is how we can reduce kind of the prevalence of provisional ballots in North Carolina. And so we had two policy recommendations that was mostly kind of Aaron's wheelhouse, if she wants to talk about those.
Sure. We were going to come out of the summer with two deliverables, one to be facing fast connections and a phone bank that Jimmy worked on, and then another that was facing our congressional representatives that are working on election reform in the North Carolina General Assembly. But in talking to them at the beginning of the summer when this was all starting to pan out, they're like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. Like we can talk about it, but there's nothing going to get done until next year. So we sort of reshifted our focus, looked at a state that was very similar demographically to North Carolina. We chose Michigan. It has almost the same amount of registered voters. It's equally purple, and they have a Republican state house, but a Democratic governor. They changed some stuff around in 2018 in regards to the law, so we could actually look at the data, like current data instead of 2004 data on the election project. And then MIT has an election lab that just looks at Great Lakes states. So they did a lot of work for us. So we ended up coming up with a couple of recommendations based on two main things that caused their provisional ballot rejection rates to, first, there are not as many provisional ballots cast, but to be rejected at much lower rates. So we are sitting in about 56% of ours rejected, and they're at 39, which still isn't great, but it's a lot better. But what we came up with was the two things is they have online voter registration, like, and then they have same day, election day, register to vote. And those are the two things that change the game.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's sort of our long-term deliverable, but in the short term, obviously like that stuff doesn't happen overnight. So we were thinking what could be a way to, between now and then, reduce the amount of provisional ballots cast and rejected. And so the thing that we came up with there is really our big deliverable, which is a phone bank. So because the North Carolina State Board of Elections posts data on every single provisional ballot cast in North Carolina, and it shows why that provisional ballot had to be cast, and then the outcomes, so whether it was accepted, partially counted, or rejected, and then if it was partially counted or rejected, why. Then it also has, like, I would say about like half of them have phone numbers accompanied with them, if like the people when they registered to vote chose to provide their phone number. And so what we were thinking, and we already have some interest from the North Carolina Democratic Party, at least, in doing this, is reaching out to voters. And the cool thing about the data is that you can sort it based on whatever metric you're looking for. So if you wanted to call like all Democrats, for example, who voted at the wrong polling place, and you wanted to use the script specifically that's like showing people how to look up their polling place, and how to make sure that they're registered in time and stuff like that, you could do that and call just those numbers. And if you wanted to do it in just Durham, that's probably like 100 or 200 people. So you could knock that out in like, if you had a couple of people, you could knock that out in a few hours, right? And so like the idea is, because all this data is so manipulable and there's so many metrics that you could really design phone banks to really specifically target people. And so the document that I have is basically, it goes through all the problems that people have that cause their provisional ballots to be rejected. So let's say they voted after the registration deadline, or they moved, or something like that. It has a specific solution and how they can actually solve that problem. And so the phone banker just needs to go through the list and call the people, and you could even leave them a voicemail, because it's all just information. It doesn't really require them to do anything besides, register to vote and click the links and stuff like that. And so we're really hoping that that can reduce the amount of people who need to cast a provisional ballot in the first place, and then also who have those ballots rejected.
Right?
Interesting work. Thank you. Just FYI, for what it's worth, I'll give you guys a quick picture here. I'm in your great state of Michigan right now.
Oh.
Spending a little time up here. I'm coming back next week, but I got to witness their primary election here, which was August 4th. And from a demographic and, as you say, sort of partisan arrangement, and also the political arrangement in Michigan, there's a lot to be learned. On the out of precinct, or on provisionals generally, one of the things that I think could be much better done is the scripting we give voters. So as a voter, you have a right to cast a provisional ballot if your ballot is, if you're not registered appropriately or what that, and we don't do a good enough job of letting people know about that. And one of the big sources for provisional ballots is out of precinct provisional voting. So what will happen is we'll locate an early voting site, like in my home county of Wake County. A very popular early voting site is Chavis Park, and Chavis Park is also a precinct on election day. And so a lot of people will get the word that you can vote in Chavis Park, and from 15, 20, 100 different precincts, people show up on early voting, which they're allowed to do. You can go to any early voting location in the county. And then election day comes along, and only people from that precinct are allowed to vote there. And so then we have to get appropriate with how best to script to tell voters, you can go to this precinct, which is your precinct, and vote a live ballot, or you can stay here and vote provisionally, and it'll only count for the races in which you're overlapped. And so we don't really have good messaging on that. I know that some folks at the Center for Civic Design are looking at how to appropriately make sure that voters are aware of their rights and aware of the differences between a provisional ballot and a live ballot. And that's challenging when you're not an election nerd, right? I mean, most people deal with this system once every couple of years, not every day. And so trying to get better messaging on that is helpful. So thank you guys for your work on that.
Really helpful, Damon. God, great suggestion. Yeah. Also, same problem at Central's campus, early vote site. And on election day, we had I think a 90% throw rate, which was dreadful. Anyhow, next team. Who does anyone want to volunteer, or I'm looking at Dahlia? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name is Dahlia. My teammate Lucy couldn't be here today. She's actually moving in and about to get her COVID test at Duke. So, yeah, real stuff. But so I'll be speaking for the both of us. So our project was kind of looking at how we can support students in making their decision whether to register and vote in North Carolina or in their home state, or kind of help guide them with all the changing information that is coming, different dates, different policies, or even just on Duke's campus a couple weeks ago, they very much announced last minute that juniors and seniors couldn't live on campus. And so kind of figuring out how that impacts students' ability to vote on campus or register in North Carolina. So that was kind of the problem that we were trying to look at. And so a lot of our data that we were guided by came from the NSLVE, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement by the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts. And so they have this report that shows that on Duke's campus in 2016, let me pull it up. Yeah, so about 70% of students voted through the early voting system, as opposed to just 15% in person on election day. And so that kind of demonstrated to us that students are more interested in this, but it really depends on where they are and what the dates are when it comes time to any decisions that Duke releases. So our two deliverables that we really focused on were a flow chart that kind of helped guide students through different possibilities, different questions that might arise, and then also a set of calendars that they can download to their own personal calendar that has the registration deadline, the absentee ballot request deadline for all the different states, and of course, election day registration deadlines. So really trying to help students get all of this information so they can make the most informed decision possible. Of course, one of the biggest wrenches in our whole process was the fact that information keeps changing and we could only plan for so much. So part of it is when it comes time for the Bass Connections group or whoever, Democracy Lab, whoever takes on this project, to just keep updating this information, whether it's the calendars or the policies or the Duke Vote site, because ideally everything that we've created will be housed on the Duke Vote site. So if you have any questions, I think I covered most of it, but Lucy really focused on the calendar part, so unfortunately she isn't here to explain more of that, but it is just to help students with their home states in North Carolina download it all and have it at their fingertips.
You took on a tough one there, Dahlia. That's a very subtle and nuanced way in which to articulate to students where they should vote, right? I mean, I, being a champion of voting, thinks that people should vote, period. But where they're domiciled in college is a very fact-based inquiry. So I appreciate you trying to work through that. That's a hard question to answer, and it requires a lot of individual circumstances and working your way through that.
Oh, and that actually reminds me. So one other piece of this that we didn't quite get to because we realized that we wanted to write an op-ed or some sort of, Medium-esque article that would inform students about pros and cons of voting at their home state or North Carolina. But realistically, that's probably a project for the next group because whatever we release in August could change by September or October. And also the impact of it, we realized would be larger if it came later on. So whether we help that team create that or we kind of pass on the idea, that's kind of where we want this project to go.
Can I just add one thing? I think what I so admire about what the project you're working on is when you're also focusing on how to make a deliverable that is easy to see and read and be known. And the thing is, I think right at the end of this time we were working together, Duke just pulled the rug and said that half of you can't come back to campus. So, I mean, from a kind of organizing perspective, it was understandable, but a nightmare. It's like everyone's calculations. So one of the things that causes voter disfranchisement is the lack of information about where they need to be and how to use the ballot. And so I really think what you've done is going to be really helpful as a handoff for sure. And I should say Duke Votes is we will be in touch with how to get your stuff there and shared. And Dahlia I should just also say, a whiz at getting some of those ideas out. So thank you in advance for that good work. Okay. We have one team left, right? Is it Catherine or is there two teams? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, Richard is also from Alexis' team. It's the second team.
Okay, so maybe I want to end with Catherine if that's all right. Richard, did you want to go first, Richard? Yeah. Both transportation related. Go for it.
So my two teammates couldn't make it today, so I'll be explaining our project. We are focusing on recruiting new poll workers that are college dates due to the risk of COVID-19. In a typical election, poll workers tend to be on the older side compared to college age students. So we thought, and being on the older side puts you at a disproportionate risk of COVID-19. So in a lot of ways, it makes sense during a pandemic to focus on recruiting college age students. And so given this, we did some outreach. We did a lot of outreach efforts with different colleges and different nonprofit organizations like You Can Vote, NC Campus Compact, and different organizations that we felt could help spread our message that we wanted to recruit college-aged kids to this initiative. And I would say this kind of this kind of quickly led to our deliverable of making an accessible flyer that would address some of the key worries that college kids will have about acting as a poll worker. So like we sent out a survey to different groups asking them if they were to be a poll worker, what would some of their worries be? What do they not know about the job? And given the information they supplied us, we gave them answers in an accessible format as a recruitment device to attract new people to this position. And then so that was pretty much our first deliverable. And this kind of quickly led to our second deliverable, which is pretty much a next step page of, okay, now here's a list of groups that would be interested in having this first deliverable, the flyer that addresses information. Now, how do we spread this around to different college campuses and different areas that may be in more need of college workers than others? So for example, for that one, there is currently a large need in rural counties for more poll workers relative to counties like Durham or Chapel Hill, where they might already have a good amount of poll workers. So in that regard, we've been working with the community college system in North Carolina to try to spread our information to recruit new poll workers to students that fit that category.
Awesome. Damon, do you have any thoughts? I know you've been thinking about this.
One, I'm I had a good conversation with Richard's team earlier on. I'm extraordinarily grateful that they're thinking about this. I think the community college idea is brilliant. I think that there's plenty of challenges that we're going to have to face because COVID-19 is making it very challenging to do almost anything in modern society. But I'm hopeful that the poll worker challenge is one that we're going to be able to meet and exceed. So thanks for the work on that.
All right. Thanks. Glad you were in touch. Okay, that brings us to Catherine's team. There she is. Introduce your team too, if you don't mind. Thanks.
So my team was myself, Yadru, Ryan, and Arjun. And I think Ryan hopped off. He's still having some internet issues from the storm last week. But our initial goal or question was how to protect the health of both the poll workers and the voters while still maintaining a safe and secure in-person election. So we initially brainstormed several ideas, and we eventually kind of decided on drive-through voting as kind of a very drastic change, but we really believed that it was the safest option considering the circumstances of the pandemic. And because it's easier to social distance if the voter is still in their car, they're only having contact with the poll worker who would be equipped with the proper PPE, and they wouldn't, be contacting other voters. So there's, just a lot more safe and secure to, I guess, reduce the spread of the virus. And because the voters are going to feel safer, we assumed that there would be an increase in voter turnout. Maybe not from previous election years, but especially from projections for this year, since, personally, we all felt that we would feel safer going into voting in our cars or in a vehicle. And then this would lead to a lower wait time inside because we obviously still maintain regular walk-up voting for those without vehicles. Just, because obviously that's a huge population, especially on college campuses. So this would not be in, I guess, replacement of that, but in addition. And our kind of plan was to include it within the early voting process. So there's, time to kind of make minute changes throughout the 2 weeks, as there wouldn't be enough time to have a full pilot period, since it would be a very quick turnaround, I guess. So with that, we picked 10 counties within North Carolina that varied in population size, but we picked those based on the size and the population of registered voters, and also the impact that coronavirus has had on those counties. So we did pick Durham and Wake County and Mecklenburg, and then also some really small counties that had a higher rate of cases per voter. And then after that, we wrote a proposal as our deliverable, directed both at the state for all 10 counties, Durham and Wake counties. And within that, we sent out a survey to North Carolina voters, and we got over 200 responses on that. And the public opinion, without going into too much detail, was really interested in having drive-through voting as an option, which was really exciting to see that the voters themselves would be interested and love to take advantage of an option like this. So then we turned that and worked that into our proposal, and kind of drew out little maps of the early voting sites that already exist, and you know, used like the Apple Pencil stuff to, I guess if that makes sense, to kind of demonstrate how that would work and have separate lines for pre-registered voters and versus same-day registration, so that those voters could still access that that amazing program, but not like hold up the line for those who have already registered. And we sent the proposal to Durham and Wake counties. We sent it to Durham through the public forum, I guess, space after they had sent out their proposal or plan for early voting. And there was a meeting to discuss all of those. And I was unable to attend, but my team members said that they did not end up discussing it or addressing it in detail. And we also sent it to Wake and did not hear a response from them. So with that, like our next steps are kind of considering, I guess, redesigning the drive-through model into more of like an absentee ballot pickup or drop-off, as this would, you know, maybe be less of a drastic change for the individual counties, but still make it more accessible and secure for voters. Because there's been, you know, lots of conversations about through the primaries and seeing, I guess, mail-in ballots not making it to the voter in the first place, or having trouble with insufficient postage and just miscommunication, just because it's such a big change and there's not much time to do that. So we thought that would make the voters feel more secure in knowing that they had the contact of putting their ballot in that box. So that's kind of our next step. And if you guys want to add anything, go ahead.
Catherine, that's wonderful work. I would like to see this proposal.
Yeah.